This is the Capitol Rundown.
To bring our economy back, we want to make sure we reduce regulation, and we would start that on day one.
It's getting rid of the retirement tax, developing a budget that supports our residential care facilities.
Even if she came up with a huge amount of money, the question is, would it get through to the people to move the number?
It's all straight ahead. The Capitol Rundown starts now.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Lauren Thompson. The midterm election is 1 month away, and that dominates our coverage today. The hotly contested race for the newly drawn 7th Congressional District in Michigan is one of the nation's biggest political showdowns this year. It could determine the balance of power in the U.S. House of Representatives, and it reached the home stretch this week when State Senator Tom Barrett and U.S. Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin sat down with our own Tim Skubic for their second debate. They talked about everything from tax credits to Social Security and the Inflation Reduction Act. Take a listen.
I would say the one that mischaracterizes my position the most would be suggesting that I'm somehow against jobs in my own district or somehow not supportive of economic development that provides a livelihood for families in my district. I'm somebody who truly believes that economic opportunity is something that lifts the tide for working families, that provides opportunities for people. What I voted against and what I've stood steadfast in opposition to is when we take taxpayer money out of the back pockets of working families in our communities and give that directly as cash subsidies to private global corporations. That's something that I campaigned against. I committed to the voters in my district I would oppose, and that's something I have had a steadfast voting record against. And what this bill that I was not supportive of was the bill that created $1 billion slush fund in the state legislature, where you had legislators and people in the governor's office signing non-disclosure agreements before advocating and voting for $1 billion fund to be set aside to give cash subsidies to global corporations. The jobs in question under this proposal are going to cost Michigan taxpayers $166,000 for every job created for jobs that will pay only $46,000 to the workers.
I think the one most recently where, he accused me of literally living with another man other than my husband felt deeply below the belt. And it's sort of a desperate measure for a desperate campaign at this point. And it's just one of those things like, I will talk about any issue with anyone on the right, on the left. I will talk and negotiate with anyone about what we want to do on substance. But when I said in the last televised debate, are you accusing me of sleeping with another man? He literally tap danced and wouldn't deny that. He's now had his people put out my address on the internet. It's all over the place. Pictures of my home from a private parking lot. As you can imagine, as a sitting member of Congress, that hasn't made me more safe. And it's just something that I would personally never do to Tom. I would never do that to his family. I would never make them less safe, and I would never accuse him of sleeping with somebody else.
No, and if you see the effects of that, we saw that every company just about raised their prices by the exact amount that these credits were going for as soon as they were approved. And in addition, this is a luxury vehicle tax credit that only millionaires can afford. My family and I can't afford an electric vehicle. We're stuck buying $4.50 gas like every other working family right now. I filled up my Avalanche today. It was $120 to fill up my gas.
I think that we're a state that, while I want to be building that next generation, the majority of us don't drive those vehicles. I think that it would be interesting to consider doing that if that was a way to incentivize more manufacturing here in Michigan. I'd be open to it, but it's not something that I wake up every day and I think about. I would leave the age alone both for Social Security and for Medicare. They're things that people have earned. They weren't gifts. They're not something that is bestowed on them. It's something that they've been paying into and that they deserve when the time comes at the appropriate age. I think there's a ton of legislation that people have put forward on making Social Security and Medicare more solvent.
Name one.
Sure. Medicare, we just voted on it this past August on allowing Medicare to negotiate for drug prices.
I want to protect Social Security, and I would not support raising the age for that because we need to make sure that we hold true to the commitment that we've made to seniors to make sure that those that are relying on Social Security have those benefits available. I don't know what type of hypothetical situation could arise, but to me, we have to ensure that we are committing our word that we are going to make sure that those that are dependent upon Social Security actually have the benefits that they've been promised. That's a fixture and a pillar of what we've done as a country, and we need to make sure that we make good on that.
Well, as you saw, that debate was moderated by our very own Capitol correspondent Tim Skubic. Jorma Duran sat down with him afterwards to get his thoughts.
Well, let me just, because I get this asked all the time. I'll come out of the studio and people will say, well, how did it go? And my answer is, I don't know.
Right.
I mean, I have a feeling for it. But to be honest with you, until I sit down and watch this thing head to tail, I can't be in the position you were in and the viewers last night. But I do have some takeaways, which I'd be very happy to share with you. But with the caveat that after I see it, some of these nuances may be different. But having said that, first of all, I was struck by a couple of areas in which these two actually agreed on something. The Social Security, raising the age. They were dead set against that, and that's a pretty smart move from a political standpoint, because most of the senior citizens or people coming up don't want to have that age changed, although the fund is in trouble, and but they did agree on that. Another interesting thing on the death penalty. Here you had the liberal Democrat who basically said she was for the death penalty in some limited cases, and he, the supposed Republican conservative, was against it. And he said people are going to be surprised. And I told him afterward, I said, yeah, a lot of people were surprised by that answer. And then the stock thing in the Congress, this is kind of a no-brainer, but they're having trouble getting it through the Congress, and that is to limit the ability of Congress people who have inside information to turn that around and make a profit on stocks. And so some barring of that behavior is needed. And Ms. Slotkin was quite critical of Ms. Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, for not letting that find its way through, although Pelosi said the votes weren't there. So there were areas of agreement and disagreement, and everybody will decide on their own. The objective was, as you know, is to provide some new information to the viewers and the voters to compare and contrast and see what they like and didn't like and then make their decision. That's what it was all about.
We'll catch up with Tim again later in the show to tackle some other topics. But coming up next, we'll take a look at one of the other congressional battles taking place right here in Michigan. This one in a newly drawn district that stretches clear across the state from Lake Michigan to Lake Erie. That's when the Capitol Rundown returns. Welcome back. Michigan's new 5th Congressional District runs clear across the bottom portion of our state. And this is where current Michigan Congressman Republican Tim Walberg is facing a challenge from Democrat Bart Goldberg. The Rundown recently sat down with both of them to talk about the issues. The two largely fall along party lines and don't agree on much, including the current ability of Democrats and Republicans to work together.
When you've reached a point where people in the opposite parties can't be friends any longer, where they can't agree on a fact, where they don't have any shared institutions, democracy isn't going to last long. And I am going to listen to and respect all people in South Michigan, and that's a little different than than the way a lot of people in South Michigan have felt during the last many administrations when he was the congressman.
We've worked hard across the aisle where I can come to that line and not cross it, but can come up to it, and a Democrat can come up to it. We can work together. You can't be successful by just telling your constituents, I am who I am, I'm not going to change. They want you also to impact something.
Well, both Governor Gretchen Whitmer and her challenger Tudor Dixon continue to work to get their message to the voters, and recently that included a forum where they both sat down individually with the AARP. Here's a look at that event.
What actions do you support to improve voting access and secure elections and voting access here in Michigan?
First and foremost, we want to look at what the laws are that were already passed to keep voting safe, to make sure that your vote counts. And one of those is to make sure that we have strong voter ID laws, to make sure the person who is voting is the actual person voting, and make sure that your vote counts just as much as the person next to you.
I have been fighting efforts on the other side of the aisle to disenfranchise tens of thousands of voters in Michigan based on that big lie that was never true in the first place. I've vetoed all of the proposals that come to my desk to make it more difficult for people to vote.
So if elected, what issues are a priority for you during your first 100 days in office, and what actions will you take on them?
To bring our economy back, we want to make sure we reduce regulation, and we would start that on day one. Reduce regulation by 40% for our companies so that they can work freely and have a partner in state government.
There are a number of things that I want to work on, but in the first 100 days, getting rid of the retirement tax, developing a budget that supports our residential care facilities and hospitals and the people that go into this important work, and ensuring that we are giving seniors real relief in the form of the repeal as well as greater investment.
Well, more poll numbers were released this week in the race for governor, and they show that Governor Gretchen Whitmer now holds a 17-point lead, and that's a 4% increase from the first polling in August. We asked our Capitol correspondent Tim Skubic what he makes of these numbers and what it could mean as we head into the final weeks for the campaigns.
Well, can you count to 17?
Sometimes.
and if you can, that's the points that the governor has the lead. Now, some of the Dixon campaign obviously are taking shots at the polls themselves, but let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's assume that 5% of those people lied to the pollsters, so it's 12%. The bottom line is it's apparently at this read, and remember, a poll is just a snapshot in time. It's not a predictor of the outcome. But in this thing, it looks like the governor's sitting pretty good, and it looks like Ms. Dixon has some problems. Now, our pollster that we talked to this week, Richard Zuba, who's been doing this for a long time, said if there is an influx of money into the Dixon campaign, the gap can be narrowed. He says, I still don't think she can win, but you could get down to 10 points. Now, why is this important? If the governor were to stay at 17%, she would likely have skirt tails that would drag in some members of the legislature who are Democratic in, and theoretically, a strong showing at the top of the ticket could produce a Democratic legislature, at least in the Senate and maybe in the House. The Republicans are not willing to concede that point, but a strong showing at the top of the ticket, even at 10 points, could give the Democrats a leg up in the control of the Michigan legislature, and that is really, some people say, the real game in town, control of the legislature and not necessarily who's going to win the governor's race. Because at this point in the campaign, people are already voting, but more importantly, people are just, they're tired of political commercials on the TV. And so even if she came up with a huge amount of money, the question is, would it get through to the people to move the numbers? So we'll find out. If she comes up with some bucks, this could get more competitive.
Tim, always great to talk to you. We appreciate the update.
Thank you both. Well, still ahead, find out where you can get more information about the 3 proposals on the ballots for voters to decide across the state. The Capitol Rundown. We'll be right back. Next month, Michigan voters will be asked to weigh in on 3 major proposals. If you're still a bit confused on what they'll do if approved, you're not alone. To help voters get informed, the nonpartisan Citizens Research Council of Michigan held a webinar this week to explain them. In a nutshell, Proposal 1 would change the term limits for state lawmakers. Proposal 2 would enshrine voting rights here in Michigan. Proposal 3 would protect access to abortions. The council presented the arguments for and against each one. All of these proposals and their full explanations are posted on the Citizens Research Council website, and you can find a link to that at WLNS.com. Former President Donald Trump stopped here in Michigan earlier this week for the 2nd time in just 6 months to rally around the state's Republican candidates. While making his case for gubernatorial nominee Tudor Dixon, Attorney General candidate Matt DePerno, and Cristino Caramo for Secretary of State, the former president also hinted at another run for the White House in 2024. Trump's visit to Michigan comes at a time when Governor Whitmer, Attorney General Dana Nessel, and Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson all have an edge over their Republican opponents in the most recent polls. Well, there's still plenty of political news ahead this morning. We jump out of election coverage and head over to the courts, where a state-level case is now underway for 3 men accused of plotting to kidnap the governor. We'll take a look at the first few days in court. The Capitol Rundown returns. A new state-level trial for 3 men accused of plotting to kidnap Governor Gretchen Whitmer started on Wednesday after 2 days of jury selection. This is the 3rd trial connected to the plot, and the 3 defendants in this case are facing multiple charges. However, unlike the first 2 trials, which were in federal court, this one is taking place in a state court in Jackson County. Paul Ballar, Pete Musico, and Joseph Morrison are all facing 3 crimes, including providing material support for terrorist plots. Throughout the week, attorneys, including Assistant Attorney General Bill Rulston, made their opening statements. The prosecution argued that the men were involved in a gang called the Wolverine Watchmen and were responsible for using firearms to train Adam Fox, who was convicted on federal charges of kidnapping conspiracy back in August.
Everybody in the Wolverine Watchmen shared a very common ideology in that they hated our government. They wanted to kill law enforcement, police officers, and that the gang gave them the motive, means, and opportunity to train Adam Fox, knowing that he was going to commit an act of terrorism.
Well, now to the Supreme Court, where former President Donald Trump is now asking for assistance in the legal battle over the documents that were seized from his Florida estate. His legal team wants the court to overturn a lower court decision that allows a special master to look over the classified documents. A 3-judge panel reduced the independent legal experts' review to non-classified documents last year. The court declined his request to block the release of documents to the January 6th committee. Well, coming up next here on the Capitol Rundown, political ads of all sorts are hitting the air. We'll take a look at one local Republican party putting their message out in their own unique way. That's after the break.
And she put COVID patients in Graham's nursing home.
Graham died alone.
Well, political ads have certainly taken over the airwaves, many costing tens of thousands of dollars, not only to air but to produce. But the Gratiot County Republican Party didn't turn to a major PAC or PR firm to get their message across. They recently made their own political ad and posted it on Facebook, and it went viral. The group of Republican bikers talk about the effects of what they see as Governor Whitmer's failed handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. They also talk about lockdowns, closed businesses, and students kept out of school. The ad also spoofs the lack of name recognition for Whitmer's challenger when one of them says he's going to, quote, vote for the other chick, and asks what her name is, to which they all respond, of course, Tudor Dixon. Well, if you're interested in getting more political news from Michigan and Washington, we have just the thing for you. You can sign up for our Capitol Rundown newsletter. This is just one email every week, and you can get it by pointing your cell phone camera at the screen right now. This will take you to the sign-up page, or you can head to WLNS.com/newsletters. Well, that's our show for this week. Thanks for watching the Capitol Rundown. We hope to see you back here again next weekend. Well, political ads have certainly taken over the airwaves, many costing tens of thousands of dollars, not only to air, but to produce. But the Gratiot County Republican Party didn't turn to a major PAC or PR firm to get their message across. They recently made their own political ad and posted it on Facebook, and it went viral.
And she put COVID patients in Graham's nursing home.
Graham died alone.
The group of Republican bikers talk about the effects of what they see as Governor Whitmer's failed handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. They talk about lockdowns, closed businesses, and students kept too long out of school. The ad also spoofs the lack of name recognition for Whitmer's challenger when one of them says he's going to, quote, vote for the other chick, and asks what her name is, to which they all respond, of course, Tudor Dixon. Well, if you're interested in getting more political news from Michigan and Washington, we have just the thing for you. You can sign up for our Capitol Rundown newsletter. It's just one email every week, and you can get it by pointing your cell phone camera at the screen right now. This will take you straight to the sign-up page, or you can head to WLNS.com/newsletters. Well, that's our show for this week. Thanks for watching the Capitol Rundown. We hope to see you back here again next weekend.